So "Twas the night before Nittel." That's the name of the shir. And all through the house, no one was stirring, not even a yeshiva bacher. And so, of course, you know that there is such a minhag not to learn Torah Nittel Nacht. There's a good footnote that I found in an article from the Jewish Quarterly Review in 1967. The article is about Jewish attitudes towards gambling. And of course, as you probably may have heard, that Nittel Nacht is a night, as are certain other days on the Jewish calendar, including Hanukkah, that have been set aside for gambling. Yes, it's rolling. Either correctly or incorrectly, there are certain nights that have been set aside where we sort of look the other way, and even though gambling is normally frowned upon, there are certain nights during the year, Purim, Hanukkah, where certain communities have sanctioned gambling. Klofim, or kvitlach, they call it. You've heard of kvitlach? Yeah. Okay, all right. So in this footnote in the JQR, it says like this: Nittel Nacht is a word of Judeo-German origin referring to Christmas Eve, most likely derived from the medieval Latin dies natalis, which is birthday. Natalis means birth, and that's Nittel. In this case, referring to the birth of Yashka. See Wetzer and Weltkirchen Lexicon. Jews were not permitted to be out on the street during Christian festivals. As a result, the synagogues and schools were closed. It was the custom not to study from sacred books during that night. And that's really what our objective tonight is, to learn about the origin of this minhag. A number of folk etymological explanations for the term were offered. Some claim that Nittel is derived from the first letter of the words Nit Yidin Teure Lernen. That it's not the time Nun Yud Tes Lamed, right? Other base the tradition upon the passage found in Gittin 57a that Jesus is comforted only while the Jews are studying. To oppose such a meritorious state, the Jews abstain from their studies. Still others maintain that the Jews tried to avoid the possible charge of sorcery on Christmas Eve by making sure that their sacred books were closed. And see the Encyclopedia of Jewish Knowledge. It has become the custom to play cards, which was explained as being done to counter the celebrations of that evening by Christians. So that's sort of a synopsis of the whole minhag. Also, others learn the word Nittel could be spelled Nun Yud Taf Lamed, Nital from the word hanged, Nitle from the word hanged, because according to one tradition, Yashka was hanged. Another could be Nital, that he was taken, because that's the night that he was, well, actually he was not really taken, but he was born, according to the tradition. But I guess there's an association of the end of his life that's associated with the beginning of his life. So there are different reasons why it's called Nittel, but most likely, as I was discussing with Saul just a moment ago, it has to do with the Latin natalis, which has to do with birth. The earliest source that I could find for this minhag of not learning Torah on Nittel Nacht is from the Sefer HaMinhagim of Rabbi Yitzchak Miterna, who is from Austria and lives during the 14th and 15th century, so it goes back to the times of the Rishonim. And he says, Tov kishiyachid omer seder kedusha lomer b'negina. So first he says that when a person says kedusha, he should sing it, and that's referring to kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. When you're saying it b'yechidus, you should sing it. And not just say it as a liturgical prayer. And then he says, "L'regilin lo omro b'kol ram," and it's also common to say it with a loud voice. Lefi shenamar gabe pesel v'gabe oror v'anu shehu lashon haramas kol. He says, because when you respond to say amen to something, you're supposed to respond to it in a loud voice. That's from the Rokeach. And therefore, when you're saying something responsive, you should say it in a loud voice. And then he says, Mizer nira li denohugu b'leil nittel lomar aleinu b'kol ram. And he says, and from this it would seem to me that that's the minhag to, on the night of Nittel, when we daven aleinu, we should say it in a loud voice. This is, again, the first reference to Nittel that I could find. Af she'ein noagin kein kol hashana mipnei hasakana kein ikar. Even though during the rest of the year we don't say Aleinu out loud because of danger. What is it referring to in the Aleinu? She'em mishtachavim lahevel varik, because they that they bow down to nothingness and emptiness. Umispalalim el lo yoshia, and they pray to a God that will not be able to save them. And some people even have a minhag to spit. So because it's a sakana to say this out loud during the rest of the year, but on Leil Nittel, some people have a minhag to say it out loud. So although this is not an allusion to the minhag not to study Torah, but it's certainly the first reference to a day called Nittel that it's found in the Sfarim. By the time of the Chassam Sofer in the 18th century, this had already been an established minhag. And he writes as follows, and this is in the Chassam Sofer in the Kovetz Tshuva Siman Lamed Aleph. The Chassam Sofer writes as follows: Be'ezras Hashem Yizbarach al davar asher nishalti me'es ma'alaso harama ma'inyan minhag isr talmud Torah b'leil chagam. The Chassam Sofer asks the question, what is the basis for this minhag not to study Torah on the night of their holiday? Lo shamati ta'am mikubal bazeh. I have not really heard an acceptable answer to this question. Gama masha shamati me adoni mori neiro ya'ir lo nihira. He's referring to Rav Nissen Adler, presumably, that's his Rebbe. Apparently Rav Nissen Adler had given him a reason, and he says, I don't find that reason acceptable. We don't know what that reason is in this tshuva. Hagam ki yesh siyata lazeh miminhag ha'olam she'oshem gam tashmish v'sogrim sharei tefillah. He says, based on what Rav Nissen Adler told me, it would make sense why we also close the mikvaos on this night, and we tell men and women not to be intimate on this night. It could be, we don't know exactly what Rav Nissen Adler opined, but it could be that we don't want to provide any zuchus to the night that Yashka was born. So therefore we don't want children to be conceived that night, and we don't want Torah to be studied that night. It would seem that those two would go together. Uladaiti minhag shtus hu v'yesh limchos bi'at hanoagim kain. He says, but in my opinion, that's folly to close the mikvos and to not allow men and women to be together that night. And by the way, in the footnote to the Tshuvas, you'll see, it's on the following page, he says, the Chassam Sofer clearly disagrees with other achronim. He says, Beinehem b'sefer Taras Yisrael Siman Kuf Tzadi Zayin Sif Beis Katan Gimel Dim Ira Hatfila B'Leil Nittel Lo Tizdakek L'Bayla Ba'osu Laila Ayin Sham. Below came Das Marin Bazek Himuvor Lefanenu. He says other Sfarim hold that even if it's the night of the mikveh, she can go to the mikveh, but they should not be intimate that night. So apparently the Chassam Sofer says that's a minhag shtus. He says, let's continue in the text of the Chassam Sofer. He says, the ilu l'tam of Adoni Mori kosha machiluk bein koidem chatzos laila la'achareha shenogim heter achar chatzos. He says, we know that that the minhag is only to be machmir until midnight in both Talmud Torah and mikveh. So why would, if there is such a din or such a minhag Yisrael to abstain from certain activity on the night of Nittel, why would you ever make a chiluk between before Chatzos and after Chatzos? Ve'echen matzinu de palgi rabbanon betakanta ditu ben palga de le'aliyah palga. Since when do we find that Chazal make a distinction between one half of the night and the other? V'ayin Gemara Psachim Beis Amud Beis. It says the Gemara Psachim bears this out as well, that once Chazal make a takana, it's for the entire evening, not for just a half an evening. Aval hanirali. But what he says, what appears to me to be correct, Efshir nahagu kadmonenu kein mishum shalolitein makom lebal davar lachlok ulasatein lekatreg, or ulasatan lekatreg. It would seem to me that the reason for that we don't study Torah the night of Nittel is to not give a person the opportunity to criticize the Jewish people, and the Satan to criticize the Jewish people. Biyos ba'osa halayla kol ha'amim no'adim beveis Eloheihem mechatzos va'elach ki yadua. He says, what is one of the special features of the night of Christmas? The midnight mass. Midnight mass, right? It's sort of like Midnight Madness at Sobeys, but it's a little bit different because there they go, they have a mass in midnight to commemorate the birth of their Lord, right? The Am Hashem Elu Yeshenam Al Mitoseim, and look at the disparity. In other words, you've got Christians waking up in the middle of the night, Chatzos, and going to their churches, and at the same time, you've got Jews going to bed and sleeping peacefully on their beds. Afilu lomdei Torah ruvam kekulam ne'orim tchilas halayla v'yeshenim achar chatzos. Even people who learn Torah assiduously generally go to bed sometime before midnight. Okay? V'lo ratzu ligzor shiyu kol Yisrael omdim hashkei mechatzos ve'elach ba'osa halayla ki'ilu anu nigrorim achar chukosehem. He says, so we want to try and counter this, that it's not proper that Christians should be up and on the alert for their faith when Jews are sleeping. It doesn't look right. But you've got a counter dilemma, which is, so what are we going to do? We're going to tell Jews to wake up and study Torah that night. The problem is that it's almost like chukos hagoyim. You're imitating the other nations by telling Jews to wake up that night. So it's almost like we're imitating the other nations, just like they wake up for midnight mass, we have to wake up for midnight Torah study. So that doesn't make sense either. He says, he says, and just to show you, we do everything in our power to avoid being imitative of other nations' customs, religious customs. Just as one example, and especially it's relevant, just one example that he cites is from Erev Rosh Hashanah. On Erev Rosh Hashanah, the Ramah says there's a minhag to fast. And our minhag is to fast until Chatzos Hayom on Erev Rosh Hashanah. I think we've talked about this before. And then the Ramah says, however, it's proper to eat something before dawn on Erev Rosh Hashanah so that you don't end up imitating the other nations, the Goyim, because their minhag is also to fast on the Erev of their Yomim Tovim. So we don't want it to appear like we're fasting on Erev Yom Tov the way the other Goyim are doing, like it shouldn't be Chukos HaGoyim. And so therefore, yes, you should fast, but also eat something before dawn to demonstrate that you're not fasting. So he says, if that's a great example of a situation where we can't tell you directly, do the same thing that the Goyim are doing, even if there's virtue in doing exactly what they're doing. So therefore, we would never tell you to wake up at midnight on the night of Christmas so that you can show that you're no worse off than the Christians in your religious dedication. So what are you supposed to do? He says, "Makol sheken she'en ligzor nedidus hashena basis." So surely we would never tell you to dafka make sure you're awake the night of Christmas to imitate the goyim. So therefore, and by the way, it's also ironic, even though he doesn't mention it here, is that the whole minhag to not put trees in our houses on Shavuos, which used to be a prevalent minhag, is also based on Christmas as well. But in any event, he says, Al kain b'haskel manu halimud koydem chatzos legamri. So what did Chazal do instead? Instead of telling us to actively wake up, to be awake at midnight, they instead told us, you know what, don't learn Torah the night of Nittel before Chatzos. And so, what does that accomplish? He says, "Umemela kol talmid chacham yoshein techilas halayla v'yokom achar chatzos." So a person who wants to learn, has a regular seder of learning, what's he going to do? He says, if they told me not to learn at my regular 9 o'clock chavrusa, or 9 o'clock seder in the Beis Medrash, I'll go to bed early, and I'll wake up after chatzos when the takana is no longer operative, and I'll learn then. He says, "Umakol shekain balei masa umatin hakoyvim itim laTorah b'chol yom mistama b'tchilas halayla v'osa halayla nedar mipnei haminhag." He says, and this will apply also certainly to balabatim who work during the day and have a seder learning at night. He says, mistama, they normally would learn before chatzos, but now that we tell them not to learn at, like I said, like their regular 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock seder. So he says, Al kain ya'amdu achar chatzos l'shalem chavosam devar yom biyomo. So mistama, they'll wake up after chatzos to be able to fulfill their daily learning. Umemela yihiyu kama v'kama oskin bavodas Hashem elu mipeh ve'elu or elu mipo ve'elu mipo v'chamas hamelech shachacha. And in that way, we'll end up having Torah learning from midnight onwards. At the same time, when there's midnight mass. And like the pasuk in Megillah says, the pasuk in the Megillah Esther says, "V'chamas hamelech shachacha," that the wrath of the king will be forgotten. In other words, we'll be demonstrating that we're not going to be sleeping while the other nations are celebrating their religious holiday. In other words, so this is sort of like a circuitous way of demonstrating that we're no less fervent in our dedication to Torah than Christians are dedicated to Christianity. So that we'll arrange it that on Dafka that night, when Christians are actually religiously dedicated, we will be at least as religiously dedicated at the same time. But since we can't tell you directly to wake up at midnight, to be up at midnight, because then it sounds like it's imitative of the Goyim, we'll tell you not to study Torah before Chatzos, and Memela you'll wake up after Chatzos to be able to study Torah.
That's not just the Gemara in Gittin, right? That we shouldn't be learning Ilui Nishmas Spacey.
What does the Gemara in Gittin say?
I'm just looking over here. The other passages found in Gittin that he's comforted only while Jews are studying.
Just show me where.
Second paragraph.
Oh. That Yashka is comforted only while the Jews are studying. I'm not sure if that's exactly what the Gemara says. The Gemara does say that in Gittin on Daf Nun Zayin that he's burning in Soar Rosachas. He's burning in burning dung, and so maybe I have to go back and look at that Gemara. If the Gemara Taka says that he gets comforted or alleviated from his burning, if Jews are studying Torah. Yeah, you're right. In other words, this is one perspective from the Chassam Sofer.
Yeah, but it's very funny though that he uses he brings in this little phrase from the Gila,
V'chamas hamelech shachacha.
That his proof before is with regards to Erev Rosh Hashanah that we don't really completely fast because that would imitate what the Goyim do, but on Purim we do. And he brings in this little concept.
On Purim we do what?
Time Sester before Purim.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't think of that. Mm-hmm.
Seems kind of like
Tainus Bechoros you also have. Yeah. It could be only because Erev Rosh Hashanah of the other nations. Maybe he's referring to Erev New Year's. You have to take a look. The Ramah doesn't make that distinction. He just says that on the eve of their holiday. So maybe he's referring to Dafka New Year's, particular holiday of New Year's. But anyway, the Chassam Sofer says, "V'tam zeh hagun be'enai." He said, "This seems to be correct to me." V'lo kasha midi heichan matzina yom shemikzaso asur mikzaso mutter. And to respond to the question that how could we have such a minhag where they would be gozer that only part of the day you shouldn't learn and part of the day you can learn. Kevin shahasvara nechona kamo shekas v'toisvus psachim sham heichan matzina yom. Just like Tosfos in the Gemara in Psachim says that when there is a logic behind it, then you can make a partial type of takana. Well, the divrei avi mori kasha o dehavalahu lahatir perik ve'ilu megalchen u'chedom dvarim hamutarm b'mei evel al kein hamuchuver masha kasad. According to Rav Nassan Adler, my Rebbe, I don't understand why, if he says that it's a time of mourning because of all of the persecution that happened to Jews, I guess that's part of what Rav Nassan Adler says, that you don't study Torah to not give merit or to, because it's a time of mourning, the birth of Yashka. Then why shouldn't you be able to learn those passages like you're able to learn on Tisha B'Av? And therefore he says what it seems to me is more correct, that we want to be able to create a situation where Jews will be up and learning on the night of Nittel. He says, "Umitoch hadvarim atalameid sheyesh ligoor behakovim moshav leitzim smechim le'ed." He says, and certainly from what I've just written, you should rebuke those who set up a moshav leitzim, a night or an evening of playing cards and getting together and having just a jolly old time, going bowling, going for Chinese food or whatever it is. He says that's certainly something that is not appropriate the night of Nittel. That was never part of the takan of not learning Torah. V'Hashem yismechenu kimei nisanu Moshe, and then he signs his name Moshe Sofer, Mi Preshberg, etc. So he says, so therefore Hashem should cause us to rejoice in exchange for all the days that we have suffered, referring to under the hands of the Christians, and he signs his name. Okay. The Sefer Taimim and Hagim it also brings down a number of brings down this minhag, and he writes as follows: Tam leminhag shenim noim melimud b'leil shachalt kufas tapes. Now he talks about it in terms of the winter solstice, which many times does coincide with December 25th, or the night of December 24th. That's
But it's always 21st.
Well, you know, the Tkufas Teves is a little bit tricky, and the argument is that Christmas was originally instituted independent of Yashka's birthday as the day of the winter solstice. It was a pagan holiday. But in any event, we know what he's referring to. He's referring, when he says Tkufas Teves, he's referring to Yom Edom. Lefisha b'yomim harishonim hayutzorei hayehudim orgim aleihem umakim osam balayla hu ana shematzu osam bachutz o barachov makos achzorios. He says this was the night, I guess the night of Nittel, when the goyim would be out and about, that if they would find Jews wandering the streets, they would beat them up very, very seriously. V'lifamim ad shemesu tachas yadam shehahamon chashvu zos l'mitzvah. He says this was part of the Christian, many of the folk Christian theology was that, you know, if you kill a Jew on this night, it's a big mitzvah because the Jews killed our Lord and this is the night of his birth, so therefore go out and kill a Jew. V'lachein gazru gedolei hador al hamilamdim ve'al talmidim ve'al b'nei hayeshivos sheyichabdu v'yeshvu b'vateihim b'layla hazeh v'lo yishotetu b'chutzos. And that's really the reason, the most practical reason why they said lock up the Batei Medrash and the yeshivas on this night so that kids should not be walking outside. And also it would make sense for the mikvos to be closed on that night also. You don't want women to be walking out at the night. It's dangerous. Otam, then he says another reason. Shenimnoim elimud b'leil shechal tkufas teves mipnei shebalayla hazeh neherag ushmo hayeshu shu klipas orev. He says this was the night that the man whose name was Yeshu was killed, and that's not really true because Christmas is the celebration of his birth, not the celebration of his death, which is Easter. So it could be that this is some kind of esoteric reading, so as not to that if the Gentile church would come in contact with this, they would not think that it's referring to Christianity. Yes.
So according to the first reason, why can't they learn in private?
So they could, but the point is that you have to, when you make a public takana, you do it for the public welfare. So therefore, by saying don't learn Torah, that'll create a situation where the Batei Medrash will be locked. Anyway, Yeshu is the klipa, is the spiritually impure shell of the raven. The Nirmas Shemo B'Torah V'Nokev Sheim Hashem. The Torah says that he who curses the name of God shall be put to death. And if you take a look at the Rashi Tevos of V'Nokev Sheim Hashem, Rashi Tevos Yeshu. Those three words, the first letter of each of those words spells out the name Yeshu. V'Cheshetitzarev Cheshbon Yeshu L'Cheshbon Klipaso Orev. And then when you take the gematria of Yeshu together with the gematria of Ayin Reish Beis, which is of the raven, that is his klip according to Kabbalistic text, the gematria Sar Pach. So you get the gematria of the angel of Pach, Shekasvu HaKadmonim Shehu Shem HaKlovim, that this is, according to the Kabbalists, the name of the dogs who go out and injure, Beseder Besod HaPach Nishbar V'Anachnu Nimlotnu, using the pasuk Kabbalistically of the container has been broken, and we have been nimlatna. We have had to flee or to be whisked away. And anyway, this is all, of course, according to Kabbalah. The Shamanu Mimagide Emes. Now, before we go any further in the time of Minhagim, this exact text in this Os Chaf in the time of Minhagim is found in a Haggah from the Sefer Darchei Chaim V'Shalom, which is the Minhagim of Munkacher Hasidim. You can find it on page 4. It says that he quotes in the name of the Baal B'nai Yisachar, Reb Tzvi Elimelech, that he says this is the reason, and he goes through this whole thing about Yeshu, that Yeshu was killed on this night, who's the Klipa of Orez, and that's the same thing. And then he says, "V'shamanu mimagidei emes sheiru masios kamen pamim b'leil netilaso ve'okrasim in ha'olam shalomdu b'leil zeh." That there are many times that people did study Torah on the night that he was taken away from the world. They studied Torah. Uba kelev levateim and a dog came to their house to attack them. Minhag Yisrael Torahi ad kan dvarav, and of course minhag Yisrael is Torah. So ad kan tochen dvarav, this is what he says. It's the Bal Yissaschar, the Bnei Yissaschar. Of course, this is all part of also the folklore that Jews have an aversion to dogs because the dog represents Christianity, because the dog is associated with Yeshu. Anyway, v'chein shemanu mirabbeinu gam kein shesipar lanu me'echad migdolei rabboseinu hakdoshim b'doro shel hagon hakadosh bal b'nei Yisrael v'toraso toras hakabbalah shenispashet anu chayim shemerov dvekusa hayalomi pamechas b'leil zeh kiminhagu b'kodesh. That even the Bnei Yissaschar himself one night was studying Torah on this night. Uba kelab leveso kenal v'achar kach hischel lizoyer bazeh v'chuvod Elokim haster davar. And the glory of God should hide the matter. In other words, we don't really want this to get out that much because this is very esoteric and it also affects perhaps our relationship with the Christian world, and therefore it's not something that we want to proliferate far and wide. If we go back to page 2.
Why isn't this like Nittel? Not only people, right? You couldn't, chatzul, black cat walks in front of you. The dog comes to your house. Every kind of thing.
No, what are you doing? You're just not learning Torah. You're not doing anything active. You're just refraining from Talmud Torah.
But taking that as a simon to refrain from doing a mitzvah.
Yeah.
The dog shows up, right? So, like I said, black cat walks in front of you.
Well, it represents. It's not just a dog showing up. It represents the sakana. The dog represents the sakana. Dog comes to your house. He's going to attack you. Dogs were pretty wild in those days. Jews were scared of dogs. It's not just like a cat who's harmless, right? And of course, it's not like that today. But that's you can associate the European view of dogs was it's a goyish thing and so forth. If you take a look at the Kuntras Achron in the time of Minhagim, he says Uminhag Yisrael Torahu Kosav liyadid nefesh harav hagon tzvi yecheskel shlita based in Plunsk. Shamati mirav Godol Yashish Shahaya Pam Echas Bimei HaChoref Al Shabbos Kodesh Eitzel Admor Hagon HaKodesh Bal Chidushei Harim Migur. That one day he was Friday night by the Chidushei Harim, the Gera Rebbe. Va'az Haya Ha'ez Shenogin B'chol Tfutzos Yisrael Shein Lomdim B'leil Shechal Tkufas Teves. It turned out that was the night of Nittel, that Friday night. And v'achlo sudas leil Shabbos kodesh im kahal hachasidim hasmuchim l'shulchanu hatohor. So he was having his tish Friday night with his chasidim. Lo amar as divrei Torah lifnei ha'am kedarko b'chol Shabbos kodesh. And that night he refrained from saying any divrei Torah. Rak sipir ki pam echas sha'al komer echad es hagon hakodesh Rav shel kol bnei hagoyla haRebbi Rabbeinu and Aibishet Zal. So the priest, he told over the following story, the Chidushei Harim at the Tish. He said once a priest went over to Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz and asked him the following question. He says, "You Jews, do you have a time when you don't study Torah?" He says, if you're not learning Torah at a certain time, because your minhag is not to study Torah. Apparently the priest was aware of this minhag not to study the night of Nittel. So he says, we know that according to your tradition, says the priest, the world endures on Torah study. So during that time when you're not permitted to study Torah, what does the world endure on? So V'heshiv lo haRebbi Rabbi Yonasan zal ki minhag Yisrael Torah. He quoted those three words. Minhag Yisrael is Torah. That when Jews observe a minhag, that is tantamount to Torah. So even though the minhag Yisrael is not to study Torah, the refraining from Torah study is tantamount to Torah study. V'zeu ba'atzmo shein landim azu Torah v'al zeh yishkim olam, and that's what the world endures on.
It also answered that in California. Well, they're not learning in Eastern Europe. In California, they probably will.
Hakmir nisht about time zones. We're not, that's, I don't think that they're conscious of that idea, right? But or maybe they are. I don't know. But you're right. Of course, that's also a good answer. That's the answer that they give. If the whole world endures on Torah, like at 4 o'clock in the morning when no one's studying Torah. Okay. Now the truth of the matter is that there is basis for this concept of refraining from doing something on a day that's the holy day of other nations, in order not to be perceived as being imitative or not to give merit to the holiness of that day. Some of the Meforshim, there's a very good 15-page article, once again in this journal called Yeshurim, but this time from the year Tavshin Mem Vav. I'm sorry, not Yeshurim, from Moriah, that I think I quoted from was it Moriah that I quoted from last week, or Yeshurim?
Last week was Yeshurim.
Last week was Yeshurim, this week is Moriah. I get so confused, there's so many good journals. So this is an article from Moriah, Tavshin Mem Vav, and they cite this Gemara over here. It's a Gemara in Tainus that talks about the Anshe Mishmar. You know the Anshe Mishmar that used to pray, that there was always a delegation of Jews that would stand in the Beis HaMikdash while a Korban Sibur was being brought to act as the representatives of all of Klal Yisrael. And then you had people called the Anshe Ma'amad, where they would divide Eretz Yisrael into 24 sectors, and the sector that was on for that time period would gather in the Beis HaKnesses and have special prayers during that period of time when it was their week that they were supposed to be praying during the offering of the Korban Sibur. And the Gemara in Tainus says that the people of that Ma'amad would fast during that week, Sunday through Friday, except they wouldn't fast on Sunday and Friday. They would only fast on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But on Sunday and Friday, they were not permitted to fast. So the reason why they didn't fast on Friday was because of Kavod Shabbos. You didn't want to go into Shabbos in a state of ravenous hunger. That we understand. That's why we don't have Tainios for the most part on Fridays. And then the Gemara says, Be'echad b'Shabbos my time alo, and this is the underlying section, why not fast on Sunday? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mipnei hanotzrim. So Rabbi Yochanan says, this is the Gemara, because of the notzrim. Now who are the notzrim? Notzrim is the modern term that we use for Christians. The difficulty is that this is during Bayis Sheni, right? In Bayis Sheni, when does Christianity come into existence?
400 or 500 years later.
The very end of Bayis Sheni, and the religion of Christianity, right? Right. Yeah, the Council of Nicaea, where they established Sunday as being the day of rest, is not until centuries later, right? So what does this mean? Rashi in the Ein Yaakov print edition of this Gemara says v'chichazu demisanin biyom chagam asuli de sakana, that if the notzrim see that we're fasting on a day that is holy for them, so this is going to be dangerous because it's going to be insulting to them that we're fasting on a day that is holy for them. The Maharsha either didn't see this edition of Rashi, but he has his own explanation, and he says in source number 7, Mitnei HaGalilim, his girsa is because of the Galileans, so there is something about Christianity in the Galil. Wasn't Yashka, didn't he do something in the Galilee? He walked on the Sea of Galilee, right? Okay, so there's a lot of stuff. So, but yeah, Nazareth is in Galilee, right?
We do the donkey.
The baptisms, right? So, whether this is a reference to early Christianity or not is unclear, but many of the Meforshim explain that this custom of Sunday being the holy day was something that predated Christianity. It predated Christianity because it was already done by pagans well before in Bayis Sheni period.
In that Sefer that the Rav quoted last time, Eisenstein,
Yeah.
I think it was. So he has a section called Toldos Yeshu and Notzri, and there he claims that the Jews dafka they sent one of their guys to convince the Christians to start keeping Sunday so that people should make a clear delineation between Shabbos and
that was one of the things that they changed in order to create a wider divide between Judaism and Christianity. But again, it's not clear that the timeline is all messed up, that this doesn't fit within the timeline of Christianity to be during Bayis Sheni. But let's see what the Maharsha says. He says, Ein lefarish mishum she'alilu aleinu shana mis'anim b'yom tov shalahen. He says, you can't explain that they're going to libel us and they're going to get us in trouble because we're fasting on a Yom Tov of theirs. He says, because we're talking about during Bayis Sheni, and that was a time when we were ascendant over these early Christians, I guess, or these pagans. Ela diyesh lomar sha'anshe mishmar lo hayu osin melacha biyom ta'anesam shelo yomru sha'anshe mishmar mechazkinon oso gamken kiyom tov shelo lasos bo melacha. He says, because on the day that you fast, if you're part of a maimed or a mishmar, and you're going to fast, you're also not going to work, because you can't work on an empty stomach. And so therefore, people are going to think that the Jews are celebrating the same day as the pagans. ומתוך זה נראה דאקום נהגו כן מקודם שהיו הגלילים דהה משמע דגם בבייס ראשון לא היו מסענן אנשי משמר ביום ראשון מטעם זה והגלילים לא היו עד בייס שני. He therefore says that it would seem to me that this pagan practice goes all the way back even to Bayis Rishon, because according to our tradition, the Maharsha understands that this practice of the Anshe Mishmar, not fasting, that the Gemara in Tainus is describing, is not just in Bayis Sheni, but it goes all the way back to Bayis Rishon as well. And in Bayis Rishon, there certainly weren't any Galileans the way that he's describing them, and therefore this must have been an ancient pagan practice to have the day of Sunday as a weekly day of Sabbath that was in contrast to the Jewish Sabbath. In any event, what we can see from here is that to do anything that is imitative of a practice of the Gentiles, especially on a day that is considered to be a joyous day of celebration for them, is something that we're not supposed to do. And so all of these things that we've seen above, as far as not studying Torah, not doing things that bring joy or gladness to the heart, is something that's consistent with this Gemara over here. This is sort of the precursor of this Gemara. I also saw a very interesting tshuva in the Sefer Siach Yitzchak, which is an early 20th century tshuva sefer from a Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss, who was killed in 1942 during the Shoah. He was one of the poskim in Hungary, and a very, very chashuv Rav, and he writes the following tshuva. He says, "B'minhag lechol shom b'leil ha'afela Nittel Nacht." He brings a minhag that I'd never heard of before. The minhag to eat garlic the night. No, Simi? Hungarians, do they eat?
It's mostly for the vampires.
Vampires and werewolves, right? So it's not so far-fetched. Listen to what the tshuva says. Be'ezras Hashem, I'm not sure what the stands for, L'Seder Yavo Shiloh, just saying the date when he's writing this, Tafresh Samach Dalet, so this is over 100 years ago, it's about 110 years ago this tshuva is being written. B'mei Shelek v'kafor tisborach ma'uta salma or ahuvai achim achmat nafshi harav agon meholot tzadik kabir. It says the person he's writing to is a person named Sheftel. V'yofia kishemesh berakia, may you shine brightly like the sun. He says, Samachli ba'od b'chidushei toraso v'yofe afnaim tam shechzak lebo minhag Yisrael Torah lechol pasim shom b'leil ha'afela. He says, you discuss this issue of the minhag to eat bread with garlic on the night of darkness, which refers to Nittel Nacht, v'ha'elilim b'karov karos yikares, and we pray that all idolatry will be wiped away soon. Anyway, he says, "Ulanias daiti shehunag zos al pi shiraisi b'sefer yashan noshan shar hamelech b'inyonei Tisha B'av." He says, I saw in an old sefer, as far as the minhagim of Tisha B'av, kosef tam leminhag zrika shumim al hakvaros b'Tisha B'av. There's a minhag to throw cloves of garlic on the graves in the cemetery on Tisha B'av. I'd never heard of this before either. He says, shehu ki ha'arizal Kosef she'en leilech al hakvaros ki misdabkim elav chitzoniyim rachmana litzlan. He says, the Ari wrote, and this is brought in the Magen Avraham, that when you walk into a cemetery, you should not walk over the grave. You have to walk around the grave. And the basis for that is because evil spirits dwell on top of the grave itself. I always thought it was because of kavod ames, right? But the Ari says that there's another reason. It has to do with metaphysical forces that are harmful, that dwell on top of the kever, and you don't want it to attach to you if you walk on top of the kever. Ubishar yemos hashana, ein adam hoylech below Torah and mitzvah. V'im eino lomei Torah maharher divrei Torah. He says during the rest of the year it's no problem going to the cemetery because you have Torah. You can always speak in Torah, you can think in Torah. So therefore, during the rest of the year, go into the cemetery, no problem. And you don't have to worry about these kochos hachitzoniim grabbing hold of you and clinging to you, because the Torah will protect you from harm. However, uvetisha b'av shehu arom v'yachaf below Torah mitzvahs machmas ha'avelus shasel lahar b'divrei Torah. But on Tisha B'av, not only are you not allowed to study actively Torah, you shouldn't even think words of Torah because they gladden the heart. V'yesh chashash sheyislavu elav chas v'shalom. And therefore you have to worry that without the zuchus of Torah on Tisha B'av, these kochos chitzoniim will cling to you if you go to the cemetery on Tisha B'av. So therefore, skulahu, he, umargali b'puma de'inshi, he says, and therefore it's considered a skula, and it's considered to be a famous saying that Hashom, da'anu reach Hashom, gam kein mavriach hachitzonim. That garlic, and even the smell of garlic, chases away these negative, these shadim, these injurious forces. L'chei noagim minhag zeh elu divrei ish kadosh hanal. He says, and that's the reason. By the way, at a pidyon haben, there's also such a minhag, to surround the baby with cloves of garlic and sugar cubes. And again, garlic, not only in Transylvania does it have that idea of warding off evil spirits, but the idea that this pungent smell of garlic wards off kochos achitzoniim is something that exists in Jewish folklore as well. Again, if you were to ask me to quantify how important it is to wear garlic if you're going into a cemetery, or to throw garlic on a cemetery, again, I'm the last person to ridicule or to poo-poo anything, because like my friend once told me, he says, never make fun of someone who can turn you into a frog, right? In other words, we don't know what some of these things, how these things work. But you definitely see that there's a certain substance to this idea of warding off evil spirits. And so where do you think we're going with this? This is the minute then to eat garlic the night of Nittel. He says, V'yesh lahavi mekor lazeh me'razal she'im b'teilam mitorah mitzvahs tzarech hagana mitosvus brachos she'Rabbeinu Menachem hayimedaktek lahavi melech ala shulchan. He says an interesting source that when you're not studying Torah you need special protection is from a Tosfos in Brachos that Rabbeinu Menachem used to make sure that there was always salt on the table. Kedisa b'medrash Yisrael yoshvan ala shulchan umamtinen ze'ezah ad sheyatilu yedeihem ve'im below mitzvahs hasatin mekatreg aleihem ubris melach megin aleihem ad kan devarav. He says the reason for having salt on the table, right, is not only just for the reason of your table is like a mizbeach, but it's also because when you're sitting at the table and you've just washed your hands and you're waiting for everyone else to do netilas yadayim, people are not able to speak. You're just, you're doing nothing. And so you're there without mitzvahs. And so you need something on the table to protect you, to provide you with a mitzvah protection. And the bris of melach protects you. That's what he says. Ubevadai mehaytaima gamke noagu lomar mizmor Hashem roi bein netila lahamotze and Magen Avraham. And that's the reason why the Magen Avraham has this minhag that he brings down, that we don't do so really anymore, but the Magen Avraham brings such a minhag that when you're waiting to say Hamotzi after Netilas Yadayim, you say the Kapitel Chav Gimel of Mizmor LeDavid Hashem Roi Lo Echsar.
Father did that, and I
Really?
never understood where he got it from. I thought it was a Hepsek. He always says the Mizmor LeDavid between.
It's a Magen Avraham. It's in the Magen Avraham. So there you got it, Simi. Right? Ask him about the garlic. Maybe you'll find something, you'll discover something.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All these years, I never knew why he did it.
With the right man.
Hooray.
It's not to think it, but to say it out loud.
To say it out loud. You'd say it out loud. Hooray, shebe'ein esak Torah mitzvahs tzarech hagana. And he says, and that's the reason why, is because you need to have something to protect you during that pause when you're not doing anything, when you're not engaging in Torah study. V'ayin gam kein b'kliyakar shelachein omer Esav yikruvu v'gomer v'ahargas Yaakov. He says that's why Esav said in Parshas Toldos, he says, you know what, when my father dies, I'm going to kill my brother Yaakov. Now why dafka when my father dies will I kill Yaakov? So the Kliyakar says something amazing. He says, Ki bimei evlo sha'asr b'divrei Torah ein davar she'yagein ba'ado. He says, because when Yaakov is sitting Shiva, he won't be able to study Torah. He won't have the zuchus of Torah to protect him. He'll be the most vulnerable. Then I'll be able to kill him. And that's why that the Avel during his time of mourning needs this added protection. V'agav mashikosav Rabbeinu Yonah sham shetzorach shmira b'shas simcha. Okay, that's something else. We'll skip that part. Let's go to the next paragraph. He says, "V'keven sheminag hakadmoidim shalililma b'leil ha'afel ve'en asukim b'toru mitzvahs tzarach hagana u'shmira shelo yizdavku chas v'sholem banu b'layla zu hachitzonim." And therefore, the night of Nittel, when we're not studying Torah, we need additional protection so that these injurious forces don't attach themselves to us. So he says that garlic and its fragrance, its pungent odor, is protective. And that's why we have bread with garlic. Okay, and he gives them a blessing. And may a blessing should fall upon you as well. Hakadosh Yitzchak Weiss. So you should have garlic bread in that poker game when when you're playing those kvittelach, which the Chassam Sofer says you shouldn't be playing the night of Nittel, because the whole purpose is to promote Torah study, not to have you to be Yosef Bottle and have Leitzanos. But he says, but that also is the minhag to eat bread with garlic. Yeah.
Rabbi Yoran in his tshuva, he says, V'im eno lomed Torah meharher divrei Torah. So why wouldn't thinking divrei Torah when you're sitting, for example, after you wash, be sufficient? Why do you have to say out loud, or in other places? Why can't you just
It could be that maybe thinking is sufficient, but he says, but maybe in order, just as an added protection when you're waiting for hamotzi, you should do something else. You should have salt on the table as a hagana. Okay. Something else that throws a wrench in all of this is the Sefer Darchei Chaim V'Sholom, which was the minhagim of the Minchas Elazar from Munkach. And he talks about something very interesting. You know that the date of Christmas is December 25th in the Gregorian calendar, but in the Julian calendar, which is what the Eastern Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox use, it's usually January 6th or 7th. Okay, so the question is, which calendar do we use for the night of Yashka's birth? So he writes in the Sefer as follows. He says, in source number 9, he says, Man leidas oso ish leil chageim shekar Nittel Nacht shel hanotzrim, the Catholics. He says, Lefi cheshbonam lo hishkiach klal. The Minchas Elazar did not pay any attention to the Catholic date of Nittel Nacht. V'lomad b'leil zeh kamo b'chol haleilos. And he learned on the night of Nittel Nacht, December 24th, Christmas Eve, he learned regularly. Ki im b'leil chagam shel hayevanim. But the only thing that he refrained from learning Torah was on the night of the Greeks, referring to the Greek Orthodox or the Eastern Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox, which we call the Pravoslavny. The Pravoslavny is either Russian or Greek, I'm not sure, for Orthodox. And that's referring to the Eastern Orthodox. Lo lomad klal aracher chatzos laila. He also didn't take any kvitlach, a petek from people who wanted a bracha from the Rebbe. He wouldn't see anyone that night. After midnight, however, he would sit and learn Kedarko Bakodesh. V'ayin b'sefer zecher tzadik libracha shenitfas b'sofo tshuvos Rabbeinu la'arav hagon Reb Shimon Sukar Shlita, based in Kadosh Halas. He says that this particular dayan was machmir not to be intimate with one's wife this night even after chatzos. The adanu b'Rabbeinu ki nasan sav lebal machzik hamikva the place of this city. I'm not sure which city. Maybe it's Munkach. That he gave the commandment to the person who was in charge of the mikvah. So he says, Ya'an shaholchim l'tfila gam b'leil zeh al kol panim hanoshim ha'omedes al hamishmar yasiris haholchim habos l'tfilas mitzvah shlo lizdavik b'leil zeh rak achar chatzos. That he told the mikvah attendant to tell all women coming to the mikvah that night. He wouldn't close the mikvah, but he told the mikvah attendant that the women should not be with their husbands until after chatzos. ומזה נראה בעליל כי מה שכוסף בתשובה הנ"ל להחמיר הוא רק בשאר לילות של מצוות עונה, אבל בליל תפילה אין להחמיר אחר חצות לעושים שאין חוששות וטוב לוס בלילה ההוא כמובן. He says, and therefore, he says, this minhag to not have any relations with one's husband is only when it's not the night of the tefillah. But if it's the night of the tefillah, you see that the Munkacher Rav permitted women to go to the mikvah, just that they shouldn't have relations until after Chatzos, to not give any zuchus to the night of Nittel. He says, provided that it's safe, provided that you go to the mikveh with safety. That's what he says at the end, that he's hinting to, because he knows that it can be dangerous sometimes at night. And finally, just wanted to share with you, in source number 10, a little bit from this journal Moriyadet. There was a long essay written by Rabbi Yosef Lieberman regarding the inyan of Nittel. He says, and it's a very, very long piece. I've only pulled out 2 snippets from a much longer essay. And he writes, in the first piece, he writes, Umasasi b'shut divrei Yisrael. I would have actually copied the tshuva from the Sefer Divrei Yisrael, were able to find it. I was not able to find it. It's on HebrewBooks.org, but they don't have Chelik Beis. They have Chelik Aleph and Chelik Gimel, so I couldn't. I just took it from this quote here. He says, La'agon Rabbi Yisrael Velitz Zal Shemevi Misefer Arugos Habosem Sheshama B'Shem Hagon HaKodesh Bal Divrei Yechezkel Zal Shemakubel Etzlo Me'av Beistin Dir HaKodesh Tzfas. He says the Av Beistin of the city of Tzfat had said that the pasuk Eis Lasos Lashem Heferu Torasecha, that it is a time to act for God, that they weaken your Torah, is hu begematria mechuben kamo zu sha'a shetkufas teves nofeles bo ad kan. In gematria, it's a reference to the night of Tkufas Teves, which is Nittel Nacht. So by the way, I just wanted to go back to the Minchas Elazar. He would refrain from Torah study on the 6th of January, right? The night or the eve of the evening of the 6th of January, going into the January 7th. And so the Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked, what should we do? Because in Russia, Nittel was January 6th, Christmas Eve. And here it's the December 24th, so what should we do? So the Rebbe said, you want to be machlish the koach of whatever culture you find yourself in. So whereas in Russia we follow the Eastern Orthodox, he says in America we follow Nittel, because Lubavitchers are very makbid in Nittel. They're very makbid not to learn Torah Nittel Nacht. And therefore, he says, the minhag changes to December 24th. So he says, Ub'shem Hagon HaKadosh Maharash Mi Bel Zal Mevi, the first Belzer Rebbe, said like this, Sha'amar al pi divrei morin habesh zal lefaresh al yipater adam mechavero el mitoch devar halacha shemitoch kach zochrehu. The Gemara says that when you depart from a friend, you say farewell, you should always say a devar halacha. We know this from Yaakov and Yosef, right? They were learning Egla Arufa as they departed from each other, and through the discussion of halacha, you'll remember your last encounter, right? That's the famous vort. However, the Belzer Rebbe says, al pi chasidus, al pi remez, he says, klomar al yipater adam midveikus habori yisborach shu chaveiro, that who is your friend that you're departing from? When you're departing from your best friend, the Eibishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, because like we know from the story in the Gemara in Shabbos, Ma'idasani alach lechavrach lo savid, what is hateful to you, do not do to your friend. Rashi says your friend there also refers to Hashem. That's kol haTorah kula. Ela mitoch devar halacha. In other words, the only way that you can depart from Hashem is by studying halacha. So what does that mean? Shirak keshalomei poter mitveikus. He says, really, a person is supposed to be thinking about Hashem his whole life. He's supposed to be thinking about the Ribono Shel Olam. But how can you do that when you're studying Torah? He says, when you're studying Torah and you need to immerse yourself in, Hashor Shenagach Es Hapara, very specific, mundane issues in halacha having to do with really very specific halachic issues, how can you be having metaphysical thoughts of attachment to the divine? During that same time, it's going to act as a distraction sometimes, right? So he says, "Demitoch kach shepater mimachshava acheres b'limudo zochrehu l'ma shalomad." He says, because you're exempt from having other kinds of thoughts when you're in the midst, immersed in Torah study, you'll remember zochrehu l'ma shalomad. You'll remember Hashem after you finish your studies. He says, and that's the reason why you're exempt, because if you were thinking about Hashem while you're immersed in study, you wouldn't be able to remember your studies because it's too distracting. ואם כן, כשאדם לומד דבר הלכה, אי אפשר לו שיהיה בדבקות הבורא יתברך שמו. He says, and therefore, when a person is studying divrei halacha, Gemara, whatever it is, he can't have that type of dveikus, of metaphysical, transcendent dveikus with Hashem. So this was the Belzer Rebbe's issue. He says the night of Nittel is such a dark night spiritually that it needs additional dveikus with Hashem. It needs that additional amount of dveikus and transcendent attachment to the Lord. And therefore, nagu Yisrael levatel az limudam kidei sheyechavnu daitam rak ledveikus habori yisbarach shemo levatel al yedei zeh koach hasitra achra elu tochen devarav b'kitzur. So that's why the Belzer Rebbe says we have a minhag not to study Torah. It's not. The reason for not studying Torah the night of Nittel is not to not give zuchus to whatever it is, but because the forces of darkness or of whatever these kochos chitzonium are so strong, you have to be focused exclusively on dveikus b'Hashem. So he says, "U'misayim shomim merabonim gedolim talmidim maharam shik that shelo lamad ima talmidim b'leil chagam v'chein ba'arugas haboisim zal kishcha b'leil Shabbos kodesh shelo lamad misefer hazohar." So basically, what we're dealing with is extremely lofty things. Clearly, according to this reasoning of the Belzer Rebbe, the reason not to study Torah Nittel Nacht is so that you can have higher levels of esoteric conjunction with the divine. It's certainly not to enable a person to play cards with his friends one night out of the year. The objective, and certainly for people who are not capable of that level of dveikus, the alternative would be it's better to study Torah if you're not going to be able to be misdabek to Hashem as the alternative to Talmud Torah. You understand? So clearly, the way that it's presented from the Belzer Rebbe, there's something higher than Talmud Torah that is necessary in order to ward off all of the forces of evil that exist in this night. So if you're able to rise to that level of dveikus to Hashem using esoteric thoughts and shemos and things like that, so then you should refrain from Talmud Torah so you could have that higher level of dveikus. That's the whole reason not to study, right? But if that's not where you're holding, right, which is probably true about, at least I said that it's not true about myself, I don't know about anyone else, then certainly the alternative would not be to not learn Torah. The alternative would be adarabah, to do as much as you can to become close to Hashem, to ward off those forces. And then further along in that essay, and we'll conclude with this, he says, "V'aliba dekuli alma asur l'sachek lifnei chatzos laila b'klofim o sh'ar motzav moshav leitzim kiloshen hachsam sofer hanal." He says, surely, he says, like the Chasam Sofer says, a person should not be playing cards or other leitzanos the night of Nittel. The Kain Kosa B'drashos Ksav Sofer Be'ezbeidol Rabbeinu Meshulam Igrazal. I'm an Einakol of Rabbeinu Meshulam Igra. He was a very, very holy Yid. That the Ksav Sofer had a hesped at his levaya, and Manomar Manadaber B'Shalanu Hara Hazos. The Ksav Sofer said it at his hesped. He said, what can we say when we have such an evil thing existing in our midst? Bismoach Yisrael le'ed v'chaga shel ovdei avodah zarah v'osim hachaga l'chag. He says, look at what's going on in our communities, the Ksav Sofer says. He says, the night of Christmas, which is their holiday, we turn it into our holiday. We get together, we make a big poker party, we have, we order the buffalo wings. They had buffalo wings in the times of the Ksav Sofer. I don't know, you didn't realize that. But, and then, we bring in pizza and with garlic, of course, because with garlic bread, and then, we have a big party. He says, what are we doing parties the night of Nittel? He says, that's not the idea. Oy na ich yerav leiv isha Yisraeli leishet besod mischakim. He says, how could a holy Jew be sitting and playing games? Bifrat b'yomim shel tsar b'yomim chestes yuteves hayachoshech ba'olam v'cholei adkan devar. He says, as is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th days of Teves. That's a whole different shir. I have a whole shir on the 9th of Teves. I don't think I've given that shir yet to this group, but one day we will, maybe when I get back. About this was the days of darkness for the Jewish people. So how can we be playing poker or playing cards He says, of Kedusha's Levi, the Berditchever writes, he says, Kosav shelo leilech bekol mischakim klal chas v'shalom. Jew should never be playing stam games. The hevu yodim shebekartin b'chol kart yesh klipa gedoyla asher lo roi lahazkira. Every single card, every one of the 52 cards on a deck of cards, he says, has a koach klipa, right? That he says, just holding the card imbues one with the klipa of tumah. He says, and you can't even make mention of it. He says, "Umetamim atzmum beklipos asher ein roi lahavi letoch hapeh ayin sham, ubesod b'shorosh ha'avoda kosav shahayirei l'dvar Hashem yarchik banav shelo yakiru kol tzuras haklipos hakartin." He says, a father should never let his children even look at a deck of playing cards because they have tumah in the images themselves. And it's ba'asur l'sachek be what? Dominoes. Don't play dominoes. Uchedoma ayin sham. We've come a long way from this time, and obviously we've shifted a long way from this type of attitude. And of course, there's so many things that we don't follow that were the standard in those days. V'im asur zos b'mei haChanukah hakdoshim, and if they assered playing dominoes and gambling with the dreidel during the days of Chanukah, kol shekein shasur lasos kazos b'layla matuch, then surely not the night of Nittel. Asher yesh chas v'shalom koach leklipa v'ayidezeh yamshichem alav b'yoser rachmano litzlan, that you don't want to draw upon the koach of tum upon yourself. So just to conclude, the idea, of course, is it's a night where there's kochos of chitzonim on this night. We don't want to study Torah the night of Nittel for various different reasons, according to the Chassam Sofer. Well, according to one reason, it's not to give zuchus or merit to Yoshka. Another reason is because it's dangerous to be out during those nights. But according to the Chassam Sofer and to others that we've seen tonight, it's so that we should be on a higher level to combat these dark forces, not that we should be on a lower level with completely devoid of any Kedusha or Torah study. Anyway, much more to discuss, but I hope that was a good starter. What do we do today? Well, some people today, they're machmir. They won't study Torah, both the Gregorian and the Julian, because they're Mahadrim mina Mahadrim, right? And in between, and the times, right, exactly, the nights before and the nights after, Lamaisa, if you were to ask me, live certainly ainli esek v'nistaros, but based on all that we've seen, I would say that that's a night when perhaps not a night to do any public shiurim or celebrations, because you don't want to do anything that might be perceived as provocative, even in today's world. But at the same time, it's certainly a time when a person should at least be learning as much Torah as during the rest of the year. So you have a chavrusa, you can have a shir in your home, something to that effect.
Are we a little concerned about Christian holidays? What about, we have fast days that invariably fall out during Ramadan also. So
During
Ramadan.
Ramadan. Yeah. No, we don't live in Islamic countries. As a matter of fact,
were there similar things for the Spartan?
We don't find anything like this among the Spartans, and certainly they didn't have Nittel Nacht in the Spartan places.